Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, August 1st already. 2022. This is the Community Consolidated Board of Education Committee of the Whole meeting. Our secretary is not in today, so Mr. Mancia will be acting secretary. Roll call, please.
Okay, Espino.
Present.
Lang is absent. Mancia, that's me. Petrielli is absent. Reed.
Present.
Sager.
Present.
Schumacher.
And I want to remind everyone to speak loudly and make sure your mics are on so we can, our video audience can hear us all. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Normally we'd be in a public comment section, but we're going to hold the public comment section until after our discussion, so people can comment on what is being discussed. With that, I will turn over to Dr. Bresnahan and her staff for item 4.0, the proper demographic study.
All right. And real quick, before we do that, we want to give a public acknowledgement of one of our District 59 administrators, Dr. Elizabeth Degree. She is our executive director for special education, and we wanted to announce her official appointment as president of the IAASE, which is the Illinois Alliance of Administrators of Special Education. She served as president-elect for the past couple years, and she is now officially the president of that organization and representing us well. And today also happens to be her birthday, so happy birthday at home, Dr. Degree. And with that, we will now open it up for our Crapper presentation. So we're going to start with some background information as an introduction to our work tonight. So we have been on quite a journey around this equity work. It really began back in 2019 when equity was identified in multiple aspects of our district's strategic plan, both as a core value as well as within goal area number 4 within our resource component to really ensure that we use an equity lens when making decisions. Last year, even before I began, we actually engaged in an equity audit process through a third-party consultant, and we spent a lot of time last year looking at the results of that audit, along with our dual language audit, which took place last year, and our enrollment and facility usage study that was conducted by Crapper, who is here with us tonight. I also added in there that there have been some shifts in policy requirements, which is another reason why the time to look at these things is more relevant than ever. While these have always been important pieces in our past, we've seen some policy changes and some new requirements from the state level that actually make us engage as a school district in equity work at a little deeper of a level, ensuring that our demographics are balanced across our schools in terms of race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, etc. And that on an annual basis, we review our boundaries and our school makeups to ensure that we achieve the best level of balance across those schools every year. So that is really what has led us to today. Just last month, we had Matt Crapper with us via Zoom to present the final report from his study to give us 10-year projections, really look at a lot of the deep details of the data around each of our schools and the students that are made up within each of those schools. At the end of that presentation, Mr. Crapper also gave us what would potential solutions be that we could begin to explore. So that was the first time that we really looked at what are some options that we might engage in. And then that is when we continued to work with Crapper and his associates so that we could look at some additional options and opportunities and give the board tonight for the first time the opportunity to really engage in discussion and questions around potential solutions. So before we turn it over, I want to go through our presentation real quick just to identify and remind our community and our board around the specific key areas that we have presented in the past as the key findings out of those audits. So the first piece, as we mentioned earlier, is looking at our demographics and highlighting that we have quite a range from 14 to 71% for our Hispanic students, 11 to 78 for our white students, and as those are our two largest racial and ethnic groups. And we also look at our socioeconomic status, which has a range at each of our schools from 29 to 66%. These are the things that, again, per our new school code, we are required to look at an annual basis and ensure that we try to achieve greater balance. That is by school, exactly. That's the ranges when we look at all 15 of our schools. When we look at enrollment, now we're really looking at some of the aspects that impact our ability to schedule, to allocate resources, and to look at long-term sustainability of each of our schools. So our general target is to achieve 300 students at an elementary school, which really, again, using best practice allows us to create that sustainable model. So right now we currently have 5 of our schools that fall below that 300 student enrollment target. Resource allocation, we began looking at this across the state of Illinois when we started reporting out per pupil operating expenses. So every year on our school report cards, we have to notify our public and put out there in full transparency how much we spend per pupil. And we have a range at each of our schools ranging from 13,968 all the way up to 19,732. Again, another area for us to focus in on as we look at why is that occurring and how can we achieve greater equity in resource allocation. Student outcomes is really what we're looking at as the entire purpose of what we do as an educational organization. So what are we trying to achieve when it comes to the outcomes for our students academically, social, emotionally, etc. So first, when we look at just our student achievement data, we begin to look at, we spent quite some time at our last meeting looking at our spring growth measurements and looking at ranges from 48% proficiency up to 87% in math, and then a range of 52 to 89 in reading based on our internal iReady benchmarking assessment. So we really want to see greater consistency and growth across all of our schools, but right now we have a pretty broad range in terms of achievement. Class sizes, which we know is a factor that greatly impacts what happens within a classroom and our teachers' ability to engage with our students, as well as students engaging with others. Right now, this was as of our class sizes last year. We had a range from 9 students in some of our classes all the way up to 32 students in some of our classes. And this varied greatly. We also, as you know, last year had students who were in multi-grade classrooms, and we really worked to resolve that issue in this school year that we are now in. So we've taken a small step forward, but we really want to decrease that range so that we have greater balance and equity amongst our class sizes and opportunities for students to learn. Transportation, we've spent a lot of time talking about that. We presented data to the board, really analyzing how long are our students and how many students are participating in our transportation. And we had a range, some students who do participate in our transportation program ride anywhere from 16 minutes each way to school all the way up to 66 minutes each way. And that goes all the way from our earliest learners in pre-K all the way up to our most senior students in 8th grade. So we're looking at a very broad range and really excessive times that we know impact students' readiness to learn once they get to school, as well as their, how they feel by the time they get home at the end of the day. Access to programming, this has been a significant state of, I would say, flux in District 59 when we really look at programming and the needs of our students and how they have changed over the last 30 years, and really looking at our increasing needs to service students in multiple programs, including our multilingual programs, such as our dual language in Spanish and in Polish, as well as our special education programs, our early learning, and all of those programs that we want to make as accessible as possible based on all students who are in need. And what we presented to the board was looking at each of our schools and understanding that not all of our schools provide the programs for all of the students. Some of that is out of just numbers, and we have too few students to have an economy of scale to offer all programs within each school, but also looking at how many programs have we moved from school to school throughout time, which impacts the groups of students that have been forced to move due to access to programming. Facility capacity and usage. Again, this plays into class size. This plays into our enrollment numbers. So when we look at how many students each building can house, that varies greatly just from size, from elementary to middle, and even amongst our elementary schools, we have quite a range of capacity. But when we look at the number of students that are actually enrolled in each of those schools, we range from 41% use of a school facility all the way up to 95% of a school's building capacity. That, again, greatly impacts what we can do within a school, the class sizes that we're able to provide, as well as learning opportunities. So what we did after we presented that data is we really wanted a first opportunity to engage our community through our families, just to better understand how do each of those areas that we just covered impact our families. So this wasn't a survey to engage in solutions. This was a first opportunity to engage families in educating around those specifics that we've been talking about, and then to better understand what type of impact those aspects of our programming and our how we set up our school district, how are those really impacting our students and their families. So we had a total of 589 responses. 422 came through our English survey, 129 through our Spanish survey, and 38 through our Polish survey. Here's a breakdown by school so you can see how many families. I want to first acknowledge that we are asking parents to do this during summer for all of our non-Ridge families. Ridge is back in session, but we do understand that that impacts our ability to capture some of these voices. The other piece that I think is really important in the survey that we put out was that we created open-ended comments, which really allowed us to gather some just direct feedback around what other things perhaps our audits didn't capture that are impacting our students' ability to learn in an equitable way. So we are in the process of collecting all that data. It just closed on Friday. So we really want to look at all of the open-ended responses. We want to translate first and foremost those that are in Spanish and in Polish, and then take our surveys and really do some trend analysis to find out what other things are we missing? What is the general feeling out there? We do understand that this is not representative of all voices within our community. And as we move forward through this process, there will be other opportunities to engage our community on some input and feedback around this work. These are just general boundary maps that we're going to use for reference tonight. And so we can refer back to these as part of our discussion. My hope is after Mr. Crapper goes through the potential solutions that we'll be looking at tonight, I want to really preface this with a few words, if the board would allow. We have not yet made any decisions. The ultimate decision, whether it is a boundary change or a school reconfiguration, that is a board decision, which would require a majority vote by the board to put into place. Our work as the administration, as staff of District 59, is to do what we've been doing, which is analyze data, provide data, answer questions, seek out partners, seek out input, so that then we can give the board the best opportunity to make the best long-term decision to achieve the equity goals that we've set out through our strategic plan. I do want to acknowledge that as we go through some of these solutions, they are going to raise greater awareness in our community when you see specific options laid out. These are all just preliminary first draft opportunities to look at purely based on numbers. These are not fully fleshed out plans. That would be very premature to do that at this time because we haven't even engaged with the board in those conversations. So I just want to reassure the community that these are not, final options and the board will be looking and narrowing and then voting. That's not how this process will work. We're going to take tonight's opportunity to engage in questions and discussion and learn more together. Then we're going to be putting together a task force of representative stakeholder groups so that we can really then engage more fully in the actual solutions that might be opportunities for us as an entire district. And then bring that back for more conversation and discussion with the board, working out a timeline to plan for the future. So any questions before I turn it over to Mr. Crapper for the rest of the presentation?
And then just to clarify a piece on that, any decisions would not impact this coming school year that just started.
The 22-23 school year is currently as is. We are not making any other changes. There are no votes to change anything related to boundaries or otherwise. Anything that is changed for the 22-23 school year, like the multi-grade classrooms and our moving of some of our programs for ELS and for dual language, already took place in the spring. So no decision made at this time would be for the coming school year. All right, with that, we will pull up Mr. Crapper and his team so that we can just look at what initially we have presented for us.
And Mr. Cropper, just make sure that the light is green on your
Yes, sir.
on your mics.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Bresnahan, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I am Matthew Cropper and also have Sean Dowling with me with Cropper GIS Consulting. And we have been working with the district for some time, like I mentioned at the last board meeting. But here tonight, just to go over some of these draft boundary options and some concepts that we have started to put together, just to really get the conversation started and just to kind of see what we have been looking at. Before we get there, I know that it's just wanted to restate or reiterate from our perspective some of the challenges that the district is facing regarding imbalances in school utilization and demographics. The district is currently operating 3 schools that are above or below 15% of the average. So what you'll see a common thread in this presentation is we've given it a color scale. Within 10% of the district average is what we call green. It's basically a goal. It's ideal. In an ideal world, all the schools would be within 10%. In between 10 and 15% is where you start to get a little bit out of balance from the district average. And so those you'll see different cells that are colored yellow, and those would indicate schools that are between 10 and 15% of the average in different categories that we've been studying. And then anything under 15% is shown as red. So this kind of helps give you a visual on which schools may be out of balance and which schools are within that green and which ones are getting close, either yellow between 10 and 15. And so you can see currently you have 3 schools operating, 2 above 15% and 1 below. And that does pose a challenge in terms of just an imbalance in some of the schools being more utilized than others, and one, Juliet Low, being on the low end of utilization. Looking at the demographic data, it shows a little bit more of a widespread imbalance in some of the different demographic characteristics of the district. And this is just your current, your 21-22 school year data. Looking, you could see you see the schools on the left, and you could see the race and ethnic and the lunch code and multilingual and special ed categories from left to right. And you could see that 6 of the total 11 elementary schools are operating under 15% of that average. So you've got the red, those that are in the red, and sometimes they're imbalanced in more than one demographic category, and in other different categories in lunch and multilingual. 5 schools are outside of the 15% threshold and several demographic categories, and 10 of the 11 schools in the district are operating between that 10 to 15%. One elementary school is operating within all of them, which is Frost. It's green across the board. So this does pose some challenges and some imbalances that we were looking at in ways to try to get these schools more in the green, at least try to get rid of the amount of reds and try to get reduce the reds and yellows as much as possible and get as many into the green as you can. Looking at your junior highs, you don't have an imbalance in the demographics much at all. You do have friendship is a little low on the Hispanic Latino demographic category. You do have an imbalance, though, in utilization of your high schools. You could see Grove Junior High is running 95%. Your overall district utilization's 80%. And so you're running, two of them are running, Holmes is on the low side, Grove is on the high side, and Friendship is right there, 4 percentage points away from the average. So we've developed several draft options that we've been looking at and exploring just to evaluate alternatives to address some of these imbalances. As Dr. Bresnahan said, it's really important to note that these are all draft. At this point, we're just trying to put everything on the table to see what could be considered. And then as the process matures, things will start getting ruled out and, and we'll start narrowing the number of options that we're looking at. But these are all draft. Nothing is final until the board approves a plan. But we've been looking at different things such as just moving boundaries. We have one option that just looks at trying to resolve some of the imbalances by just moving boundaries. There's other options that look at alternate use of facilities, potentially using a facility instead of an elementary school as a junior high school. And then we've also looked at pairing schools, which is a concept of taking two boundaries and merging them into one boundary. And so you have two schools that serve a larger geographic area. And in one school would serve all the K through second graders in that area. And then the other school would serve all the third through fifth graders in that area. And so all the kids would go to both schools throughout their elementary tenure, and then they would migrate up to junior high school. Any option that we're looking at, just as Dr. Bresnahan noted, wouldn't be implemented until 2023-24 at the earliest. And then we do expect that these options could be modified, new ones could be created as we continue to explore this and explore a solution that best meets the needs of all children in this district. So I talked about pairing, and pairing is a concept that a lot of districts are using, and we've seen it across the country. And I wanted to provide just some context on some benefits and some challenges of school pairing. And so when you look at that pairing model, there are a lot of benefits to pairing schools, like I mentioned. One is the focus and concentration of the curriculum and services to 3 grade levels. So if you have all the teachers in one building are educating K through second graders or third through fifth, you have more teachers educating at that grade level, and they can work together. They can focus on the curriculum and more of a focused delivery of education, like more teachers to collaborate with on a particular grade level. You may have more classrooms per grade level, so you can more opportunities to match students to teachers according to teaching and learning styles. So you have more of a bigger pool of students at those grade levels, so you have a little bit more flexibility in how you arrange your classrooms with the teachers and such. The media center can have more materials for the kids per that grade level, so a lot more materials and things like that focused on those particular grade levels. Students sometimes feel safe being with other students near their own age, more peers their age that they can learn and grow with. They may be able to participate on a more equitable level and more activities and be less influenced by older students. A larger number of classes in a 3 grade level allows more opportunities for students from special needs and ELL classes to be integrated with typical peers on a more regular basis. The building principle of a 3-level school is more focused for planning developmentally appropriate initiatives and activities and professional development, so that the building principles focused on those 3 levels, and they're honed in on what's best for those particular grade levels. And then, although an added number of school transitions can be seen as a downside, a lot of the comments that we've seen across the country with pairing is it adds another transition, which can be seen as a negative in children having to change environments. But some people have said, and studies have shown that having an additional transition or a transition before they get to junior high kind of readies the child before they get to that junior high level, and being adapted and learning how to make that transition. And so that could be seen as a benefit. Some of the challenges with pairing is that you have it's less convenient for families for parental involvement, such as PTA meetings and things like that. You have a parent with 2 children, a second and a 4th grader. They may have to be, their children, they have to attend activities at 2 different buildings. So that can be a challenge for families in that. Communication with families of children at multiple schools instead of one can be a little bit more complicated, and just having to communicate to parents having to manage communication from 2 different buildings. Again, the more transitions, so that's a benefit and a challenge, like I mentioned. Staff, student, and parent relationships don't have as much longevity as a K-5 school, so the principal doesn't get a chance to really learn the child and sort of build the child up through 6 years as opposed to 3 years. Fewer opportunities for interaction between grade groups. So sometimes schools will have activities with older grades and younger grades to kind of mentor, like a mentorship type of options and opportunities. And then, as I said, scheduling overlaps, such as parent-teacher conferences, can be a challenge. And then transportation from communities to schools can be a challenge, although routing can be coordinated to provide them as much of an efficient solution as possible with school pairing. So that gives you a little look at both the benefits and the challenges. And this is based off of some research that we found from different schools that have done these types of studies and thinking about what if they want to go into a pairing type of model. And so we found some of these things online. So diving right into the options. So we have the first option is a draft redistricting only option. And I'm just going to go through the elementary ones first, and then I have the junior highs after this. But in this particular option, all grade cohorts remain the same. We just keep all schools as K-5. We're only, as we estimate enrollment for this option, we're only moving students if they're moved from their zone school. If they go to a school in the zone that they attend, and they're moved, those are the students that we count. And that preserves the programs that are offered. So we don't, we're assuming that programs remain as they are in the district with this particular option. So just moving boundary lines, not pairing schools. And this option does balance utilization, but it doesn't do have much of a benefit in terms of demographics. So I have, for every map, I show the current zones, and then I show the redistricting or the option zone. So you can kind of see them, kind of like when you go to the eye doctor, they go back and forth. It kind of helps me to go back and forth to see them. So if you look at the redistricting option, you can see we move areas. I think that almost every school would be impacted in this particular option, with the exception of maybe Forest View in Devonshire, and Bird, Salt Creek are not affected either in this particular option. But this option basically moves zone lines to try to get bring those schools out of the red and more into the green, if at all possible. And this is really trying to do is what can we do with moving as few students as possible, and trying to resolve some of the imbalances that exist. This option, you could see, have the current and then the redistricting option on the right. You could see we take all the schools out of the red. We bring them all into the green, and Juliet Low is just below 10%, but we do bring it up from 41 to 52%. So you could see this does provide a much better balance of utilization across the district if this were to be considered. It does not do much for the demographics, though, in terms of trying to make schools more equitable. You could still see that we still have a lot of buildings that are in the red and in the yellow across different demographic categories. So my takeaway with this first pass was that we do a good job in balancing utilization, but this one doesn't do as much as the others in terms of the demographic component and trying to bring schools more into the green and out of the red in terms of demographics.
So basically, if I look at the map,
Yes, sir.
I see three basically changes in this redistricting. Is that correct? Oh, sorry. So basically, looking at the map, I see three basic district redistricting changes in this map, correct? Would be the section just below John Jay, which, do we have a pointer or anything like that, or?
I have one here. I could show you
Yeah,
this section right
Yeah,
here.
that would be one of them there.
Yes, sir.
And then there's the one down by, the gray down next to the purple. Yeah, that there.
Yes, sir.
And then just above it, which is like the state of Idaho on its side.
Yes, this goes to Brentwood, and these two get picked up to go to Low. This is really more in no man's land. There's no population in there.
That's another.
But so we drew those in to connect them all. And then this area goes to Brentwood currently.
Right. That'd be the other move, correct?
Yes, sir. And then so that we assigned a Frost in here to try to, and then so that comes out of Brentwood, and then this the one down off of Oakton comes out of Brentwood to try to bring their utilization down, which it does. And then the other adjustment you'll notice is Claremont. This section of Claremont goes to Rupley.
Okay, I missed that one.
And
What road is that again?
Elk Grove Boulevard. Okay, so it's Elk Grove Boulevard.
Yeah.
Is where that cut line goes for this northern section of Claremont to Rupley in this particular option.
Okay, I just want to highlight that for everyone. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And you'll see the areas that have moved in this option, you'll notice that those are common areas that we're looking at as we try to balance utilization. And you'll see them also in other options as well.
Can we go back?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, can we go back one slide? Does anything change with this pocket of Bird? Where I remember the last time we looked at all the way on the east side, Toohey Avenue. Are these students are still driving across town to go to Bird?
Yes, sir. That remains at Bird. The area communities off of Toohey and Elmhurst Road there's a lot of students in that area, and so it has been a challenge to try to figure the best location for that population because there's not a school very close to them. They can't all go north because they can't fit in Devonshire. And so really what we're looking at, the only option for those communities is to attend a school over on the west side of the district, south of 90 is what we're looking at.
I have a question. Do we know about how many students live in that area?
So there are 454 K through fifth graders in there's three mobile home communities, Black Hawk Estates, and then there's another one off of Toohey, and then the Oasis. It's about 454 total kids K through 5. And of that, I think 200 of these students in this area go to Bird, and 209 go to Bird, and 128 go to Rupley. And then there are our students that are overflowed to Salt Creek. There's about 94 of those students that go to Salt Creek.
And isn't it true that if we did not have the Polish program at Claremont, some of them would be coming, or more of them would be coming to Claremont?
The programs draw, like you asked about the Polish program at Claremont. If there are students that are coming into Claremont from out of zone for the Polish program, if that program weren't there, that would open other opportunities for more students to attend that building potentially as well. Yes, ma'am.
Probably more of a question for the administration, but if we're talking about transportation time, sometimes I wonder if anything's solved. Because if we look at Juliet Low, we're still going to have some students that are going to live on the south end of Elmhurst, south of Oakton. That's a hike to get all the way to Juliet Low. And if we're concerned about some students having, 66-minute drive times, I'm not sure if that's a solve. But that's just my initial reaction.
So, just to clarify, you mentioned 450 students, and so if we're looking at that area, that actually is more than Bird in that school, correct? There's some into Salt Creek and some into Rupley.
The Rupley is the yellow area, which is assigned to the
Okay,
Oasis.
so that's a top part of that.
Yes, sir.
That's Willoway up there. Okay.
Willoway is actually
No, that's Willoway right
yes,
there.
sir. And that goes to Salt Creek.
That goes to Salt Creek.
Those kids go to Salt Creek. Yes, sir.
So those lines are accurate then. Okay.
And yes, and so it does. All the students in those mobile home communities don't go to the same building, but they are split to different buildings geographically, as the map shows.
And just to clarify, most of this area is industrial right in through here.
Yes, sir. That's correct. It's almost all industrial with the exception of a few small pockets.
So even though Rupley is a huge it's only drawing from a small community area.
That's right. And we did provide some maps that give an overlay of the non-industrial areas that you could see and visualize without the industrial areas. What do the zones look like? And you'll see that there is a lot of, and we overlay the non-populated areas in gray. And if you see it, you'll see a lot of gray on the map to show that there are a lot of areas in the district that don't have any houses in it.
And this was a sort of the only redistricting option looked at, or were there others considered that?
This was we do have some other options with where there is redistricting as part of the option, but it also involves school pairing. This is the only one that is just purely redistricting without extending beyond. What we found was that this option, you can balance utilization better with just redistricting, but it doesn't resolve any of the imbalances in the demographics. And so we've looked a little bit deeper into trying to resolve both utilization and demographics with some options in this first round of maps. Not to say that we couldn't create another redistricting option or look
Right.
further at anything.
Because it strikes me that you're maybe not trying to move boundaries as little as possible, it seems, by moving chunks here and there rather than reimagining the starting from scratch on the boundaries. And I don't know if a more aggressive redistricting would clean up some things.
It's a challenge because of where the schools are located and the size of the buildings, and the capacity of the buildings and the population that's distributed across the district. It is a challenge to provide a scenario that accomplishes better balance of the demographics and utilization. As Mr. Mancia said, we do have an area that comes all the way up to Low, that is a further commute for those families than Brentwood, where they go right now. And in order to do something that would have a better balance of demographics, would probably involve a lot more enclaves and probably a lot more transportation imbalances, kind of like you see there with that one example for Low.
I know I asked this for Dr. President. Can we you also have a population density map? And you kind of referred to, I think maybe it's a good idea to kind of show the densities of where we're at. So people in the community can see, here's where our density population is at, which kind of shows some of the struggles we're having with
here's the grayed out area that Matt was referring to. So you can kind of see where our non-residential areas are within the district. And then this is that kind of density, the student density piece that Cropper prepared for us.
And so this shows you that you have a lot of kids up north of 90 And then a lot down in off of Toohey and Elmhurst, south of 90. But you look on the southwest part of the district, it's not as hot per se. You know,
Right.
this is like reads just like a weather map for, and so you can kind of see where you have the heavier storms, for lack of better words, and lighter, you know, in terms of density of students.
What I don't understand, and it's not necessarily a result of the report, but if you go back a slide, you know, we have these pockets. Like for instance, we have Salt Creek here, but then we have that little pocket of Salt Creek all on its own on Oakton. You know, so it's kind of these pockets along the map where it's kind of like why is that there? Why is it situated like that? You know, so it's those questions are going to come up. You know, we got to make sure that the administration has answers
Yeah.
for.
Can I give some context to
Yeah,
that? Because I
absolutely.
think Mr. Ludloff throughout the past few months has shared a historical kind of chart of the last 30 years of changes that have taken place. In 30 years, we've had 4 boundary changes. The last one actually reversed the one prior to that. So technically, I think we've had 3 real significant boundary changes. Other than that, we've had a lot of programmatic moves. So when we look at some of these pockets, we're talking about some of our dual language programs that have been heavily influenced by needs of students. And that's where there's been some movement. And again, trying to balance out where those programs can be housed based on where students reside. And again, these are boundaries, not necessarily where students are attending based on program. That would be I don't know if we could even draw a map for that, but that does, I believe, lend to a little bit of the history of how this came to be.
Right. Yeah. These have been in place for decades now. But it's just now that we're kind of putting the spotlight on it, it's kind of like, why is it like that? Why?
And we can't change where the industrial areas are at. They're where they're at.
It'd be pretty
And
tough.
and basically our borders are the outside of the district, and we have to figure out the best way to accommodate everything inside of that district.
And if I can make a recommendation too as we go forward, we're looking at not only numbers, but also demographics. And we need to explain the benefits of making sure there's the balance of the demographics, you know, and making sure that we understand it as a board, but also that the public understands it. That if we have a school that only has 14% Hispanic students, how does that impact that 14%? You have 100 kids, you have 1 Hispanic student in that kid. You know, so kind of the SEL impacts of that overall, just so we kind of understand the bigger pictures and the goals of you know.
And to further that, also free and reduced lunch students with, you know, socioeconomic status as well.
So I'll keep going. If you want to come back to this, we certainly can. And take a look at the next option, which this is one where we're actually pairing schools together. And you'll see that this does make a pretty significant improvement on the demographic composition of schools as it relates to the district averages. This does move boundary lines in addition to pairing buildings in order to balance things out as best as possible. We are estimating enrollment on these based off of if you live inside the area, this is the school that you would go to. So the estimates right here are based off of if you live in here, this is what they would, and you went to that school, this is what the numbers would look like. So we pair all the buildings together, and luckily you have your zone buildings are in even numbers, and so we're able to pair them pretty efficiently. And they're in a location too. Your schools are in locations where pairing is an ideal scenario. We do this in a lot of other districts. Some places it's just not ideal for pairing. That's when you want to pair buildings, it's best to have buildings as close together as possible, so that, you know, for all those dynamics I was talking about with the parents potentially having kids at multiple buildings and all those different factors. It becomes less ideal in a pairing scenario when schools are very far apart. And but we've paired Devonshire and Brentwood, Forest View and Juliet Low, John Jay and Frost, Robert Frost, Rupley and Salt Creek in this option, and then Bird and Claremont. This one does have since we are counting students who live in the zone, this does include students who are currently enrolled at Ridge back at their home school. But there are, that's not to say that Ridge is going to be taken offline. It's just in this particular model, we don't have Ridge in this embedded into this option.
Matt, real quick before we move to the map, can I, just for sake of clarification, was there any rationale currently based on this as to why certain schools you were chosen as K2s versus 3-5s?
Yes, we try to look at when you pair buildings together, it's most ideal to have buildings be of similar size, because if you look at K through 5 in an area, usually the grade cohort sizes are relatively similar in size. And so it becomes really challenging when we start working with one building that has 700 seats, another one has 300. When you start pairing buildings, it becomes a challenge. And so this, this is the first one. I think there's another pairing that has the Devonshire Brentwood grade configuration swapped. We're trying to look at the size of the cohort versus the capacity of the building and trying to match that when we identify optimal pairings. So, and I think the next when I get to the numbers, you'll kind of see, I'll talk a little bit about that and show that. So these are your current zones, and this is what a paired model could look like for this. And this has, you could see, I said Rupley and Salt Creek are paired together, and then Bird and Claremont. And then you have Juliet Low and Forest View up top, and then Jay and Frost. And you can see the buildings are close, relatively close together, and it is ideal when it comes to pairing these buildings. This one still has students in Brentwood and Devonshire, which you'll see there's some higher numbers, and I think it's Brentwood in this particular option. So there are options. There's still things that we're looking at, and we're still studying all these maps and numbers. And there are other options and opportunities to make them even better than they are, or make it other adjustments. So looking at utilization here, you see we do have one school, Brentwood's on the high side, and that, as I said, that can be resolved by moving that one area in the redistricting to low, and that's very likely to take this and these either green or this to yellow and this to green, or bring a better balance between those two buildings if that were to be considered. So we still have some imbalances, but you only have one that's in the red, and it's 80, I think it's 86. It's a little grainy on that one, but yeah, 86% in that particular option. But if you look at the next slide, you could see that it takes all the buildings out of the red. There are only 3 yellow categories in the whole district, 2 buildings that would be within that 10 to 15%. So by pairing buildings, you could see that it does pose a significant improvement in terms of more equitable demographics across the board in this particular option.
Just very high level questions, just so I can understand. In a paired model, we have 2 separate principals. They're still operating independently. Nothing changes as far as school names or anything like that. The buildings all stay the same, right? Is it just kind of like the everyday, day to day?
Yeah, I think those are things that would be determined whether you call it a primary school or an intermediate school that you add into the title. But no, I mean, only those things don't necessarily have to change because you're changing the configurations.
So I have a question about this versus the previous modeling. In the previous modeling, you left programs where they were. Here you've moved students. To what degree does that have an effect on this chart?
To what degree does what happen?
So in the redistricting option, you left students who are attending outside of their boundary, right? In this model, in this chart here, you haven't done that. Here, all the students have moved. does that mean we have at each school every program? Or we have programming that has to go on top of this that will redistribute students?
Correct.
and
There is
send them back the
programming
other
that
way?
then would have to be layered in. So this is right now just based on geography and numbers. But so for example, which is a really good point, if we looked at currently, Rupley houses our ELS program.
Right.
So the students in this model here that you're seeing, those students are back in their home buildings, which would not be a move that we would make. We would still need them to be programmed together. And we would then determine based on the building utilization where those students would go. So we have to still, once we look at this and have this initial conversation, we have to layer in transportation impact, and then we have to layer in programmatic impact. I think what it does do, especially in our dual language piece, we are hypothesizing that the pairing model would allow for more programming to be housed within students' home schools, because we'd have a greater economy of scale across that. Specialized programs that do not service large numbers would still need to be layered
Right,
into here.
and those have a demographic impact when you move those students around, which would make this
Correct.
chart a little less green than the previous chart,
Potentially.
a little less green.
We don't know those.
But we don't know, but
Right.
maybe that's something the task force
But
could,
as
could
we-
go into
as we-
details on.
As we talk more about this,
Yeah.
though, that, once we give you direction, you can start layering, like I said, layering that in there.
Yes, it will be a tremendous amount of work to actually identify each student,
Right.
then pair them into a program, and then actually place them and look at that. So when we're sitting with 4 or 5 options here, we want to kind of start paring things down, and then we can invest time on our end to see where that works and work with a committee and task force to really identify, okay, what are the actual impacts?
Okay,
This
so-
is the very high level first view of what pairings might bring to us.
And it might be too soon, but in a pairing model, other districts that have done it, are the start times staggered? Is that how it's structured?
It varies. Yes, there are models where just like our middle schools. So right now, you can imagine we have a grade level center. There are junior highs.
Mm.
So for example, in districts such as CPS, they're K-8. So a lot of suburban districts moved into a grade level pairing model and created junior highs for larger geographic regions and specialized programming. And so, yes, you have staggered start times. Typically, that's most influenced by transportation.
Sure.
So depending on how transportation rolls out, that dictates what changes would have to be made in terms of start and end times.
Right, and to all of that. So the pairing model is obviously new. I haven't thought a huge amount about it, but so would students all get on the same bus and then the bus stops at 2 different places, or is it 2 different buses?
I've
or
seen
is
it both ways.
Okay.
It again depends on like the geographic area of between the 2 schools, all of that. So I've seen it both ways, where they pick up one, pick up the next, drop off, or where it's easier and less time to do separate routes. But that again all depends on the structure of the school.
And then other practical considerations, things like parent-teacher conferences. Do the schools hold them on different days, or?
Yes, it's just like what we do right now for the junior highs, and actually we even consider it for the high schools when we recognize that there are parents who have kids in our elementary, in our junior high, and in our high school. And so we are aware of what are parent-teacher conferences at each of these schools. How do we stagger them to allow for parents to participate?
Oh, and I had one more question. So is there anything special for the K-2 schools? Kindergartners, I think most of our schools have bathrooms in the classroom, that sort of thing. Are there modifications that need to be made in a pairing model?
There may need to look at some retrofitting in terms of that, but it is not bathrooms are not required to be in kindergarten classrooms. So that's not necessarily something that we would have to do, but we would want to be mindful of furniture and classroom size and capacity. We absolutely look at that. Even within our schools, we look at that. Which classrooms are best for kindergarten and which classrooms are best for 5th grade, even within a given school. So looking at, that potential impact when we really look at which one would best lend itself towards a K-2 and what type of reconfiguring or retrofitting would have to take place, as well as for the 3-5 gym space. Exactly, which our elementary gym space is lacking in general. whether it's K5 or K2 or 3-5, our gym space are definitely on the very small end for all of our elementary schools.
The other question I have too is, we looked at like the key findings, what we want to hit on, enrollment size, transportation, access to program, et cetera. But how do we judge like the outcome piece? How do we judge the success of this type of change? Like, is it possible? Like, how would we do that?
So I think it's that you look at all of those key factors that we've established as our targets. Are we better able to balance class sizes in a predictable and sustainable way across the district? Are we able to allow opportunities for teachers to collaborate with their grade level counterparts? Do we have more steady enrollment across grade levels from year to year? Are we able to provide access to programming within our school setting and still in a sustainable way? And are we able to allocate resources on a greater balance per pupil as opposed to the great discrepancies that we have? So that data will all be indicators as to whether or not we are achieving or moving closer towards our goals with whatever option or changes are made or not made. Those are the targets that we want to continue to look at.
Historically, and I don't know if we know offhand, has junior high always been 6, 7, and 8, or did it change? Was it 7 and 8 and made a change?
It is, from what I know, been 6, 7, 8. I think at one point, didn't a 5th grade move, like was there ever construction or something where there was a movement?
6, 7, and 8 for as long
Yeah.
as I
Yeah,
remember.
I think the standard configuration here
Sure.
has been 6, 7, and 8.
I'm going to make a suggestion. I think let's kind of go through some of these other options. We can ask these
Yeah.
other generalized questions as we go through. So let's
Sure.
let's get through these options and we can have some discussion, because I have a bunch of things I want to bring up as well too, but I think kind of wait till we've seen it all. If you have specific questions about a plan or a option, let's go ahead and ask that. If not, if they're generalized questions, maybe we can save them all to the end and then we can have kind of a better discussion about it all.
Okay, so we've developed some other options. We're really, like I said, we're trying to think out of the box, everything that could potentially be a potential solution, and just continuing to evaluate them. So we've got a second option here that does pairs buildings, Devonshire and Brentwood, Forest View and Low, Jay and Frost. This one pairs Ridge and Salt Creek instead of Rupley, and then Bird and Claremont. And same note about Rupley as the prior one. It's still undetermined as to what is the best use for that. But it's, these are all drafts and still working through it. But it does improve demographic balance like the first option shows. And if you look at the paired option model for this, it's very similar to the first one. It's just really using Ridge and Salt Creek instead of Rupley is the primary change or difference with this. And so in looking at some of the numbers, you could see we have this one also, I should mention, moves that area out of Brentwood, like option one, redistricting pairing one did not. And so if you see the numbers, bring Brentwood down into the green and doing that, and that brings Juliet Low into the yellow. I think before they were both red in the first option. Ridge is running high in this as a paired building, and a lot of that, it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. Ridge has a capacity of 422. Salt Creek has a capacity of 673, and so it's better to have buildings that are comparable in size, so that you don't run into one that's lower and the one that's on the higher side of utilization, because most of the grade cohorts are relatively similar in size as they move through. We do have the similar benefits in terms of demographics in this model as in option one, and that we bring take all the red is out of this particular model in terms of the imbalance, and you have 3 demographic categories that are in the yellow across the district. So a significant improvement in terms of demographics, and as well as balancing utilization. We've got a third draft option here. This is what we're calling option 3. It moves lines and pairs buildings. This one does flip the grade cohorts of Devonshire and Brentwood and Jay and Frost as compared to 1 and 2, trying to see, because when we were pairing them, we noticed that the grade cohort was a little bit larger in one versus the other. So this swaps them to kind of fit them better with the size of the cohort that they're serving. So in this, Brentwood would be a K2 and Devonshire would be a 3-5. Forest View's a K2, Low's a 3-5, and then Frost is a K2, Jay's third through fifth. And then we have Ridge, Rupley, and then Bird and Claremont in this as pairings. And this one looks at Salt Creek as a potential junior high school. And it does maintain perfect feeder patterns because we're also looking at the impact on progression from elementary to junior high and trying to have all the elementary feed to the same junior high. But there are some instances where an elementary may be split to 2 different junior highs. But in this particular option, it's a feeder, 100% feed, so there's no splits. And if you look at this particular map, you could see that we are pairing Bird and Claremont on the bottom. You could see how it goes all the way across the bottom of the district. Salt Creek is a junior high in here, so we've taken the southern part of Salt Creek and it feeds into the Bird Claremont pairing. Ridge and Rupley are in the yellow. We also draw the Willoway community off of Oakton into the Ridge Rupley zone here for utilization, really more trying to look at balancing utilization and proximity as best as we can. And the other concepts that you see for Low and Forest View and Jay and Frost and Brentwood and Devonshire look similar to what we've seen in option 2. Looking at utilization, we've got Juliet Low on the low side. It's currently 41. We bring it up to 53%, but it's not enough to get it out of the red. Ridge is running high on this particular model. And Devonshire's just in the yellow. Juliet Low goes down because we moved that Willoway back south where it currently goes, and so that brings Low's utilization down. Where if that Willoway community were in the low Juliet Low zone, it would be better utilized.
If we were to consider converting an elementary school to a junior high, would that require us to, like, I'm going to use the term retrofit the elementary school to a junior high, like new lockers, bigger urinals, bathroom stalls, etc.?
Yes, when just similar to the kindergarten question, we would have to retrofit out to be appropriate for the grade level that it's housing.
Well, not only that, would we need a different teaching pool for that? Would we need math specific teachers, social science specific teachers?
I think that the key piece here is that you're not adding more students. So you could, it would have to really be rolled out, but you're greatly decreasing the population at Grove.
Okay, so
So there's an
Grove teachers-
offset,
I see.
right? It's same number of students, just different configuration.
And we liked we posed this as a potential option just because the capacity of Salt Creek is a 673, and it's up there comparable to some of your other junior highs. And so we felt like it was something that could be something to consider just to bring Grove's utilization down as well. And so that was kind of some of the rationale and looking at this as a potential option to talk about.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me too. The something to consider going forward. If we chose a pairing option or analyze the pairing option, are there construction costs or other costs just to
It's
do a
all
pairing?
free. No,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
there would absolutely,
But, new
with
signage,
with
new all that
anything,
stuff.
yes. With anything, we would absolutely look at the cost impact, the building space, all of those things would have to really be carefully reviewed for all of those things to be viable options.
This particular option has more in the yellow, but fewer than the current and fewer than we have so to demonstrate and show some of the benefit of junior high utilization when we get to there. So take note, you'll see that the junior high utilization between 3 and 4 represents the 3 with a pure feeder and 4 is with a split feeder to try to better balance utilization between those two buildings, Friendship and Holmes. Looking at this particular pairing, you could see Ridge and Bird are paired together. They still pull a draw from communities off of TUI. And Oakton, Willoway feeds into Bird Claremont, and the Oasis feeds into the Rupley Claremont pairing. And so this would feed into Salt Creek Junior High. These would feed into Grove Junior High. And then, this would feed Friendship. And then the remainder would feed into Holmes. So this is the split. Basically, the current zones would be split as they currently are divided down Busey Road, and that would be the split. And I'll show you that in a minute when we get to junior high. This has a little bit more of a few more in the yellow, but and Juliet Low is still running on the lower end of utilization. Still have a much better improvement in terms of demographic balance across all schools than compared to the current, and that no buildings are in the red, and trying to minimize number of yellow, trying to get them all in the green if at all possible. Can I go in the junior highs? Is that what you'd like to keep on going? Okay. So these junior high options are modeled along with an elementary option. Not to say we can't mix and match if as we continue to explore these, but the redistricting junior high option fits with the first redistricting option and then the elementary pairing 1 and 2. So this first map basically shows you the current zones, and Grove is running high in your current utilization as we were talking. I think they're running 95%, and so they need some capacity relief. In looking at the redistricting option, all we did in this particular option to bring that utilization balance is to have Willoway go to Holmes, and so Willoway feeds into Holmes Junior High in this particular option, where currently it goes down to Grove Junior High, and doing so brings all the buildings into the green in terms of utilization. You get rid of that. The Grove goes from 95 to 88, and Holmes goes from 65 up to 76. And so you do balance utilization by moving a small segment of your community.
Mm-hmm. And then just to clarify, I think the note on the bottom, if you go back a slide, that this change would go with option 1 and 2 that we discussed previously, right?
That's correct.
You can't, you can mix and match them, but they have to go along with the other options.
As it currently sits, they are sort of grouped together, or joined together and planned together. So yes, this does fit for both 1 and 2, the 1 and 2 options.
Do they have to go together? Like if we hypothetically did option 1, do we have to do this option to keep the greens, or are they exclusive?
Not necessarily. I think that's still up. We haven't really looked at mix and matching these options, the junior high and the elementaries. This one, the redistricting keeps everything as K5s in the redistricting option, but in the pairing option, we do have the feeder split with Jay and Frost in this. And so there are pros and cons with keeping them together or looking at other alternatives.
I think those
groups.
patterns are what we tried to be very mindful of, that K through 8, progression. But then we also tried to think about the high school progression as well, and keep all of that in mind when looking at the various areas.
I, along with what you just mentioned, the part about Willoway going to homes makes perfect sense to me because Grove has been overcrowded for as long as I can remember. And if we could solve that problem and help our junior highs, to me, that would be one of the most important things that I've gotten out of this whole program this evening.
And I think relieving the enrollment size at Grove is part of every option that is out there, because I think we heard it through our family survey already. We've heard it just anecdotally that those sheer numbers. I think what's important even to look at here is that while you see utilization brought into the green, that still puts Grove at 814 students. So whether or not it's just a big building, and that's still a lot of students. So we not only can look at the percentage, but we need to look at the numbers as well.
The thing is, when my children were there were 1,000 at Grove, and we didn't even have all of the additions on, so it would be a huge help.
And demographics are not, with this particular option, your demographics at your junior highs are relatively balanced currently across all three schools. And so this one makes little impact to the demographic composition of your schools, brings homes down, the white percentage down 4 percentage points, but overall not much of an impact in terms of the demographic balance that currently exists at your junior highs. So the last two junior highs do fit with the pairing option 3. This one has Salt Creek Junior High, and this is the one that looks at all elementary paired schools feeding 100% in the junior high. Again, it's a draft, and there are some, still some imbalances in this, but it's just something that's being examined and looked at here. So in this particular pairing, Salt Creek, you could see it feeds the very similar group as the Byrd Claremont pairing in feeding 100% into Salt Creek. Grove is there with Ridge and Rupley. And then you have this is one where Holmes is being fed by 4 schools, by Frost and Jay and Low and Forest View. And so you'll see on the next slide that Holmes is running high and Friendship is running low. And it's a good demonstration to see what if we don't split feeders, and then versus option 4, if we do split them, the difference in utilization. But you could see here that that's Holmes. Let's see. Is that 98? Okay. So Holmes is at 98, and Salt Creek is at 53. Grove is 55, and Friendship is at 50. And it's really hard to have a pure feeder that's going to be bringing Holmes up. You solve some, you don't bring all the schools out of the red in this particular model. So it's something that we're still looking at with that. This one also does bring a red cell into the mix for an imbalance at Grove in terms of being 15% above the average in Hispanic Latino. And you have a few more yellow cells also that exist at your buildings. Looking at the fourth option, it's something that basically has Salt Creek being fed by Ridge and Byrd, and then Grove is fed by Claremont and Rupley. We still have the Byrd on the satellite area over off of Toohey feeding into the Byrd Ridge pairing. It would also go to Salt Creek in this option. And we have basically Holmes up top is looks similar to what it is now, as well as Friendship. And apologize for the low resolution on these tables. We'll make sure we get them better the next time. But you could see that this option balances your utilization much better, and keeping schools more with you sacrifice in doing some splits, but you do have a better balance of utilization in your junior highs across all schools here. And then looking at your demographics, you could see you have the current on the top and this particular option 4 on the bottom, and does result in some more imbalances than the current junior highs, but it also, think of it as it's this is a group with elementary and junior high solution, and so trying to work through options that fit for all grade levels here, but you could see the resulting demographics for the schools in this particular option.
Was Salt Creek the only school that was considered to be converted from elementary to junior high?
Yes, due to the relief needing to be on the south side of the district, and that being the largest elementary on that side.
So
And also its current physical structure lends itself as well.
yeah, so
Wide hallways.
White Hallways has a gym. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And, land space, things like that.
So it was mentioned earlier that the minimum size for an elementary is 300 ideally. For a junior high, I would assume that's bigger.
300, I think, was the target for elementary schools.
Right. So, but I would expect at a junior high school, you want a larger population to have more athletic clubs, more, after school activities, that sort of thing. So is there a minimum number we should be looking at? We don't want to dilute the junior high population too much, right?
Right. I think we had talked about 400, but obviously in some of the models, they go a little bit lower. So I think the other piece too is understanding if we think back to the last presentation with the 10-year projection, the bird area was one of the areas that was shown to have some of the increase. So it does allow for some room to grow, but definitely, we don't want to get to the other side of the spectrum where now it's so small that we can't program for those smaller numbers either.
So in every option we've seen, it's kind of like the Ridge program is going to be kind of something that considered, or is that going to be, how is that going to fit into this, the current Ridge program?
So I think that is a conversation that the board needs to engage in terms of, does it align with our current equity goals? And how does it configure in terms of how we program across the district as a whole?
What about programming changes? Those, were those considered, like if we're looking at Claremont and, the percentage population enrollment at Claremont, any with the dual language Polish program, any considerations as to adjusting that program or any changes to that?
So again, I think based on what we saw for the very first time tonight is really looking at what are the things that looked like potential viable solutions that then we can layer in what those programming needs might look like.
Okay, so my question was on transportation with a pairing model. By necessity, there's going to be an additional transportation need, just because half the students who live within walking distance have to then take a bus. Do we have a sense for how big of our transportation population that is? So like, could we get the numbers on how many students are close enough to a school that they wouldn't take a bus now, and how many are assigned a bus route? Because that would give us a sense of the increase. I
Yeah,
don't know
so
what that percentage is.
that's another piece that once we kind of have some parameters,
Okay.
we're going to take transportation and programming and layer them in so that we could really see potential impact on each of those things. But to prepare that for all four of these would be,
No, no, no.
yeah,
Sure.
we didn't want to go down that road prematurely.
But
And we also have to look at really the boundaries. And I think that's to Mr. Cropper's point about proximity of schools together, because busing happens at 1.5 miles or hazardous crossings. So some schools have more just based on where they're located, regardless of what configuration they have. So we have to consider all of that when building out the transportation model.
Mhm. I think also too, not that we have an answer for this yet, but whatever option we choose, or when we narrow it down, what third parties do we need, not approval from, but if it's transportation, if we're going to add more buses, how much notice do we need to give to the transportation companies of the change? Or the food, if all of a sudden if the food is going to be reconfigured and going to different locations, do we have to provide notice? We may, I'm not sure. But trying to thinking of those other impacts that could change things.
I think mine is more of a comment than a question. I just look at the 4 options at the elementary, and it's basically making minor grouping changes and making small movements of certain groups of people. It's just the same 4 or 5 groups or areas or demographic areas that are being moved, or not demographic areas, but like population areas, like this apartment complex or this like Willoway or something being moved from here to there. And that I kind of want, kind of like Joe seeing what if we look at some broad changes? Because I see this and I just see like the 4 options being very similar. It's picking one or the other. And I kind of want to see some broad attempts at something, or broad. I don't say broad, like a broad swing at it or something, like it's like an attempt at something else to see. Let's challenge the norm and see what's out there.
Because I guess like closing schools, opening schools, those like what's the extremes of?
I mean, as we saw from the great thing point is like, do we build a building can we build a building on the east side of the district? As you've seen, the schools are on the west side of the district because many years ago when schools were being built, that's where the populations were at and the students were at. And now times have changed and they've moved from one side to the other side based on, people moving, not moving, or having families and stuff. So I think this is our chance to look at things and really try and get this right. Because I want to make sure whatever we come up with is a flexible and equitable and can be sustained for many years to come.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we want to have to go through this in 4 years again, or 6 years again, or 10 years again. Something that can account for the changes in swings in population that we're seeing right now, and our demographics. That's what I'm looking at. Can we kind of, and I'm probably just babbling here, but can we kind of try something really drastic potentially, or look at something drastic?
I think that would be some of the parameters that we as an administrative team really want to get clarity from the board on. So for example, if the board were to say, could we, and where would it be possible to build another building? So I think we would come back and have financial reasons, yes or no, as to why or why not.
Mm-hmm.
And would that unintentionally create even further segregation and imbalance by bringing a school closer to certain populations of students that then eliminate us from having more inclusive opportunities and true diversity within our schools? When you look at the larger geographic regions of our junior highs, I think that's what we see, is that as an entire community, we are fairly well balanced and diverse, regardless of the geographic location. So we can create 3 regions that really create a fair amount of balance. I think the other piece is just initially looking at our numbers, we do not need all of our physical space. So the board needs to entertain the idea of, would we shut down a building? And then if that was something you wanted us to explore, we would say yes or no. After having a good amount of time spent with this data, I don't think we're in a position to let go of a building to sell it or anything in that. I don't think that would be wise. But looking at a pure utilization standpoint, we have to think, how can we maximize our spaces to provide greater opportunities? So looking at our south end and having an early learning center that would increase our opportunities for early learning, that would be something I think the district would be very interested in exploring, because that is something that is a great inequity. And I think, as Matt pointed out in the presentation, whatever options we look at should move us closer towards our equity goals, not farther away.
After hearing this tonight, I'm not impressed. I do think it requires a lot more discussion on the part of the board and the administration and the teachers and the community, all of us. And I still go back to the suggestion I made at the last meeting about the committee of sevens, because it would be 4 groups of people from different areas, all talking about the same thing and going over this and deciding which of these options are possibilities and which we're not a bit interested in. And I think that's probably where we have to start, because.
And that is the planned next step. So tonight, if something was thrown out that was absolutely like, this is ludicrous, we can't even explore this, now would be the time to ask those questions. I think the other important question that is being asked, and I want to go back to Randy's point, is that we, in all of these options except for redistricting, there's a significant change to how we enroll at Ridge. And the board needs to engage in that conversation in order to give us direction on how we move forward. Is it, and the way we enroll, is it in alignment? I think when we did our dual language audit as well, and we looked at we brought up systems that currently utilize a lottery process, and does that align with our equity vision? So if we start fundamentally with those like given parameters, that's what's going to help move us closer to put out scenarios that will lead us to a better solution, as opposed to another 30 years of doing what we've been doing, just moving around marginalized groups of students.
So you brought up.
I agree. However, I don't think it's something that can be just decided by the administration or by the 7 of us. I think we have to really work together on this.
So I want to ask the question. You brought up the dual language and the lottery for the dual language. We have 3 dual language programs. We have the Polish dual language program. We have a one-way dual language program and a 2-way dual language program. Now there's there's a Ridge lottery program as well too, to get into Ridge. So my question will be specific to the dual language programs for right now. If we decide to go to these, I don't want to say grade level centers, but what was the key word you used?
School parent.
School pairings. Would we need those? Would those lotteries be still impacted based on families choosing a 2-way versus a 1-way dual language? Or how would that work?
I think our goal, based on the outcomes of the dual language audit, would be, and I don't want to speak, ahead of myself, but I think what we came out with a better understanding of is, how do we create those opportunities for all students who want to participate in those, but prioritizing those students who qualify for those services and ensuring that they get their needs met. And then really looking at how we expand our other programs from our capacity to do so.
Okay. And then you are looking for direction on Ridge from us tonight.
No, not necessarily, but it's just a conversation that we have not engaged in.
Right.
We have not engaged with our parents about. So it's a lingering piece that is greatly impacted. And it's just a conversation that it needs to be a part of the long-term plan, as opposed to an afterthought or an assumption.
Yeah, and I think, just to reemphasize what Dr. Bresnahan said at the beginning, this is step 1. We're getting the information now. This is, we're seeing it for the first time. We're asking questions for the first time. You're hearing our questions for the first time. And a lot of it, like to me, school pairing is very new. I know Joe made the same comment. It's very new to Joe. and I'm sure it's new to a lot of us. But redistricting is, how does that impact? You know, what are the changes? What are the benefits? What are the cons? School pairing, how does that impact? What are the benefits? What are the cons? So in order for us to make a sound and reasonable decision as to whatever choice we make, we have to analyze these things. And there's going to be pros and there's going to be cons. There's going to be people for, there's going to be people against, and we have to take all that into account. But it's not a decision today or tonight or anything like that. But it's the beginning point of it all.
I think I want to have a request for next time we have for every presentation we have. In your presentation, you kind of mentioned, you had some almost like list of things like, utilization, all those things. I'd like almost see like a list of goals. I mean, I think those first 5 pages of your presentation could have been like goals really of what we want to accomplish. I kind of like to almost see those summarized and like be the first page of our presentations going forward. So we always remind them these are what we're shooting for. And I think on top of that, you also mentioned there's a state policy, that has been enacted that we need to follow too. And I think showing that policy help us remind us, hey, we're making these decisions because of this. And when we make decisions, we go back to here's the goals that we have. So we can say, hey, this is one of our goals. If we make this decision, well, it doesn't make this goal, but it makes these other 4 goals.
Yeah.
Kind of like, every time we discuss, every time we talk about have a presentation, we go back to our strategic plan. I'd like to see something like that going forward.
Yeah.
And also, as much as I think it's a good idea for us to look at different ideas and solve some of our problems, I don't want to make anything worse. And we have to be very careful that we don't do that.
Yeah, because ultimately at the end of the day, we're looking at a lot of numbers up here. Thank you, Mr. Cropper and team for putting that together. But each one of those numbers is a family. Each one of those numbers is a student. So if we have a classroom with 8 kids and there's another classroom with 30 kids in that classroom, there's an impact there. Or if there's a pupil that's getting $13,000 per spend and another that's getting double that, there's an impact there. So it's just remembering that not only are there students, but their families, and just kind of figuring out what's the best way to make these decisions to benefit everybody.
I think that ends as we want to do what's best and provide the most impact to the most families. On top of, hey, this group marginalized, or this group, here, we want to make sure that everybody has equitable access to everything. And I think that and I'll bring back the facilities plan when we, had secured entrances to all our buildings. And we said, okay, all these buildings have this except for these, so let's make these buildings equitable. So now we need to look at equity amongst what our students can have.
I'd like to add one more thing. A lot of this has focused on demographics, and I would also like to see us focus also on academics. So are there academic advantages to pairings? Are there academic disadvantages? Are there programmatic advantages for special ed or something like that? I would like to know more about it. How does it compare to what we're doing now? And I'd like to make sure that we're not just balancing numbers, but we're also balancing impact, right? Trying to get the best bang for the buck, basically, right?
Yeah.
And impact the most students the best we can.
And that's probably, on top of that, looking at it later on as we start to narrow it down, showing us, if we can, like examples of this would be a change in this scenario. So parents can see, if my child goes here, if it's either redistricting or school pairing, this is going to be what my student will receive versus what they couldn't get before. Kind of just really seeing kind of the day-to-day benefits of whatever decision we make.
I think just to make a quick kind of research best practice comment about the academic outputs, which is an outcome of the changes that we make. So currently we have a wide discrepancy amongst our schools in terms of the academic outcomes that we are able to achieve. So in looking at a change, so for example, back in the day when technology was the big question, do we go one-to-one? Is technology going to make a difference? And the $1 million question was always, well, does technology raise test scores? Mm-hmm. And the research is still inconclusive because it's not a direct contributor. But does it provide access that creates opportunities that leads to higher exposure and achievement? Absolutely. So when we're looking at research for the last, I don't know how many decades, and I'm sure you could speak to this as well, but looking at the research around grade level centers, it is not necessarily the configuration of the students that is going to produce greater or lesser academic achievement. It is always what comes down to what happens in the classroom. The teacher and the interactions and the engagement with our students is by far and away the most important thing that impacts that. So we know factors such as access to resources, class size, school environment, all of those pieces are contributing factors and are levers that can impact it. So how do we create the best conditions for our students? And as we look at any negative that's going to come along with any of these changes that are made, how do we offset those? By being proactive with a plan. So whether we're moving groups of students through a boundary change or through a programming change or through a school pairing, how do we ensure that we are being proactive to eliminate the barriers for a negative impact of any of those changes? And I think that's what we do when students transition from, let's say, 5th grade to 6th grade. We do 6th grade orientation. We have them come over for visits. We do a lot of groundwork in order to make that transition successful. I think the other piece too is that while grade level centers right now is new to a couple of you who are sitting on the board, I think that grade level centers, based on my administrative team who has been here much longer than me, this has been a concept that has been floated and looked at, I think, for decades. We have different factors now and different needs that are telling us why equity is the work to do. So I am not for nor against pairings or grade level centers. And while maybe that has been in my past experience in my previous district, it was the need to address equity issues. So whatever outcome we have, it has to address the equity. It has to move us closer towards it. And I, as an administrative team, as a staff, no one is married to any of these options because we just want to find what will allow us as the staff to do the best job possible to create the conditions for success for each and every student in District 59. Now, my advantage sitting in this seat is that I look at all 6,000 of our students. As a parent in my own community, I look at my 4 children. And as a mom who had to have kids in 3 different schools and cart them in times, it is hard. It's challenging. And that is not to be taken lightly. And any of these changes that are going to come are not to be taken lightly because, as you said, Robert, these are individual students that we have to be responsible for. So what is the collective good? And I think to Randy's point, what will have the most positive impact on the most number of children moving forward, years and years and years to come? And I think that's hopefully the goal of sitting with these issues for so long now and taking our time to really better understand what are the challenges that we face, because it's not just an overcrowding issue at Grove. It's not just a class size issue at one of our schools. It's all of these things together that we have to look at comprehensively. And certain people are going to see themselves in each of those different categories. Some may see them in all. So what can we do to best position ourselves for the best long-term plan? That's why the task force and getting stakeholder involvement is going to be really essential so that we can go through these and really better understand what's the impact. But at the end of the day, the decision is going to be made by the board. It is not necessarily an individual vote. It is the majority and will of the board that will help us move forward towards this plan.
I think it's important too that we realize we really have wonderful schools, and there's great
Absolutely.
familiarity and togetherness within each school. There's a proudness. Everybody comes with their own little special thing that they bring to us at the board meeting from their school. If we dilute that by pairing things up and having them go to different schools, we might be diluting the very thing that's our strength. Our strength is our schools, our individual schools, and what they believe in themselves. I'm not saying we don't have to do some of these things, that we shouldn't be making changes and improvements, but I don't think taking them out of the school and moving them to another school and diluting their togetherness is the way to do it.
So I will just challenge a little bit of that because I don't disagree with you, Mardell, but I think the challenge is whatever has to be done will move students.
Well, it might move students, but not every school and I mean, we may have to change programs, we may have to change boundaries. We've been doing that for as long as I've been on the board, 40 years. So, I mean, I'm not surprised if we have to do that.
So I think that's the question, because that has been the pattern for the last 30 years. So is it okay to move groups of students
If we have to
at
do
the
that.
expense of not making a larger change? That's just a question that the board's going to have to, really think about. Are we okay moving smaller groups of students at the expense of others, or vice versa? I think that's the discussion the board has to have.
Yeah, and I'm not, like I said, it's stage one, it's step one. I'm not married. My mic is off. Like I said, it's stage one, step one. I'm not married to one decision one way or the other. I think us as a board need to scrutinize it. So if we ask a lot of questions and our tone is very, a certain way, it's not necessarily that we disagree or we don't like, but it's just that we just have those questions. So it's just more of gathering the facts, gathering the input, gathering the analysis, looking it over, and taking our time with it.
And we have to listen to the parents, and we have to listen to the teachers, and we have to listen to the principals. I mean, everybody's got to be involved in this. Not just the 7 of us, because we're not in the schools all the time.
I want to ask the question of what districts around us have school pairings or grade level centers?
There's a significant number in a lot of different models. We have schools in just our area, 57, 23, Itasca. 23 made the change about 10 years ago. They're actually a district that I visited when they made that change to learn from it. We have some districts not too far from us that are some are K4 and 5/8. So there are some that are K1s to 3s. I think that the thing is that it's not that one model is the best way. I think that's what I've learned through being in various settings. It's what is the solution for our needs? Because it can't be one size fits all. It just doesn't work that way. We have just look at our boundary map. I think, Matt, you could probably attest to the uniqueness of our district, and you've worked with a lot of districts. So maybe speaking from your experience might lend to that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you have your boundaries do speak on the challenges that you have in terms of how there are enclaves and satellites, and anytime we work with a district that wants to try to help address some of these challenges, we always go back to the best solution is one that best meets the needs of all students in the district, not just one school or one neighborhood or one community, but what's best for all children as a whole. And knowing that change would have to happen to try to get to your targets that you're trying to hit with benchmarks and things like that. But there will be people who are unhappy no matter what way you go about doing this. But you always have to just focus on what's best for all children in this district. But you could tell with some of the imbalances that exist in the district, and big swings and utilization and demographics that, in my opinion, something does need to. If I were in your seat, I would agree that something does need to happen to try to make things more equitable. Because when you have equitable environments, you're able to really just carry things forward and deliver education to everybody in an equitable manner, and everybody ends up improving and winning in that model.
I think we have to remember too that equitable, however, is very wonderful. We should all work toward it, but that doesn't mean uniform.
Different than equal.
Yeah.
Right.
Matt, real quick, since you're here, could you speak a little bit about your work around the Department of Justice and where that in terms of like the policy, and where that opens us up in terms of what is the underlying accountability that we have around equity? It's not only just a good thing because it's the right thing, but what is it in terms of some of the legal implications?
I have worked on multiple cases with the Department of Justice and serve as an expert for federal desegregation cases. And there's couple hundred still out there in the country. And so they call me to help look at where there are imbalances, and a lot of it is driven by, it's all by the courts, so it's driven by a lawsuit that's underway, and I'm helping to work with the DOJ and the school district to try to come to some balance or some agreement. And so when we do that, we evaluate a lot of the statistics and data the same way. I have testified in federal court several times across the country on cases that districts have had challenges similar to what you guys are challenged with. Sometimes they're much more extreme, and in terms of, all one demographic category in some schools and those types of things. But it all comes back to the same thing, of what different ways can you evaluate and structure your schools, and how do you, my expertise is student assignment. So trying to make sure, how can you assign students to buildings to make things more equitable and try to resolve some of those big imbalances that exist. And we look at pairing all the time. But I like to look at redistricting first. That's the one of the key things I try to do when I look at this type of work is, how do we solve the challenge by moving as few students as possible? So always trying to look at what's the minimal impact solution, but giving the biggest benefit. And sometimes, minimal impact solutions don't give you as much of a benefit as other ones that are more impactful and impact more communities, such as pairing and things like that. But yeah, it's something that I have a lot of experience in. And, I applaud the district in taking a look at this and seeing what ways that they can approach this challenge.
So what's next steps? What do we do?
So if there's any immediate questions that the board had that we could answer, I know we are meeting a week from tonight, which is really close. So I'm not sure how much more information we would have that would be different. But our hope is, in pairing and partnering with Cropper, is to set up our task force with representative stakeholders for a group. Matt has given us some recommended numbers so that it doesn't become too unwieldy. But do you want to talk a little bit about the structure of what that committee's purpose would be, and then how we engage the broader community as well, even though we
Sure.
just have a working group?
Yeah, it's we've done it a lot of different ways, but the way that I feel is a really good model to look at is have a task force, a group, an advisory group of community members that live all across the district. Bring them around the table. It's best to have 25 to 30 is a good number for people when you're working with a committee like that, and basically bring ideas to them and have them give us insight on what the options are, what they like, what they don't like. I always tell those committees the same thing: is take off your parent hat when you come sit around the table and put on your committee member hat and focus on what's best for all children, even if it may affect your child. To think out, just think broad-based on this, but and have this group give us the administrative team guidance and insight towards options that the administrative team takes into consideration as they work towards a recommendation. And also the advisory group helps frame things and give us insight to what we may be hearing from a broader public. So in addition to a committee, going to the public a couple times and sharing options to the general public as a whole, inviting them to come to a large venue, look at maps on the walls, talk with committee members around the maps, get some input, and surveying them, and surveying them a couple times, surveying at the public info session, like those big, broad general groups, but then also start a general comment form, feedback form soon, and just start getting input from parents right out of the gate, so that you could start seeing what input people are saying. And a lot of it's emotional, and what we have to do, and one of our jobs as consultants, is to separate the emotion from the objectivity, and we bring objectivity to the picture. And, but although there are a lot of emotional comments that come through, there are good constructive comments that come through as well. And so focusing on those constructive feedback, things that'll bring us closer to our goals and ultimately end up in a recommendation that's best for everybody in the district.
So Matt will be one of our partners in preparing this and facilitating this process. So our hope is in the next couple of weeks to identify key stakeholder members that could serve in this and do a reach out so that we could get a commitment. We're hoping to have at least 4 working sessions. We would want to have representative 2 board members who would serve on this task force as well. And then have those sessions that then would report out back to the board in between when that timing is, and then ultimately lead to a final recommended plan that we could discuss then with the full board.
Mhm.
So that is the layout
Right.
and kind of hopes. We have a probably too aggressive timeline that I'm looking at, but I also feel like you get to a certain point where you're like, I need to know what's going to as a parent, I need to plan. I need to know what the plan is going to be. So I think we need to try to work as efficiently as possible. So our hope is through end of August and through all of September to have those working groups happen so that by middle of October, we are closer to a fleshed out plan, and then leading to hopefully a recommendation and board vote in November, December timeframe. And again, I want to just be very clear that the timeline for an implementation has not been decided, nor has it even been proposed. So this isn't everything in 23, 24. This is how that's going to be task force feedback, feasibility. We have to look at finances. We have to look at facilities. We have to look at all of those impacts to really lay this out for the most successful, whatever the plan is, how can it be most successfully rolled out?
Sorry, I want to add one question that I just thought of that I should have asked earlier. I know you gave us like the numbers we're looking at now would be for next year. And I know you've done a birth rate study for us that, you kind of extrapolate out into the future. How would these numbers change, or would they still be a lot within the green, or are you able to do that?
It's more of a challenge because we're looking at different data differently when we're estimating enrollment like this. But there are ways to be able to give some insight into trends in terms of enrollment numbers, and so we know, as per our demographic study, which areas we're looking at having some growth and which areas are stable and which areas are declining. So we can take that into account, and as we look at modeling options, and that's usually the first step is to kind of try to even things out, and then maybe make adjustments to account for future trends that we're seeing. But you don't want to go too heavy into making those adjustments, because there's no telling what may happen in the next 10 years. But you want to be as proactive as possible, and we do have ways to try to be as proactive as possible with these.
Yeah. All right, sorry for that last question.
So on that question, there was a question of, we had a prior demographic study done, and we were hoping to see some information on how that had played out in the past.
Yes, we did. So we ran kind of internally looking at how accurate that prediction was that Cropper had done for us previously. Tom, do you want to speak a little bit to that piece? And Matt as well.
Sure.
You're the expert, after you, sir.
Well, I'd say that I believe that we ran a little high on the forecast in terms of what actually happened. And there were a lot of things that happened between then and that. I think it was 2017. So COVID certainly had an impact. And some of the other things that are happening in the last year or two are deviating from what we had assumed. We were assuming a 5% home mortgage rate. There are different factors that can slow migration that have come to play and caused enrollments to be a little bit below what we have forecasted.
Yeah, from a district perspective, within that first actually 6 years, it was a plus minus basically 0 to 2.3% change. At the same time, many of the schools look different because many programming decisions were made. At Claremont, the dual language Polish program was added. At Forest View, LOP was moved out. So almost every school had some sort of change. So school-wise, it jumps a little bit, but that first 5 years from a district perspective, it's pretty on target. And I could share out a little more in the Friday update.
Any questions, comments? Okay, so I think we'll move on to comments and suggestions of the public. I know you've heard a lot of information and probably some comments. If anyone wants to make a comment, there was a sign-in source, sign-in back there. We'll make sure those people get a chance to speak first. Questions, does anyone want to speak for the board? Because then I gotta say something. Or was that kind of all about just listening and? You want to say something? So I'm going to read this then, if you're going to say it. Come on up. So basically, we're at, tonight is a regular scheduled meeting of the Board of Education. The purpose of this meeting is for the board to properly address the items of the agenda publicly as required by the Open Meetings Act. To allow the board time needed to address all agenda items, we ask that you please limit your comments to 3 minutes. A board member will serve as timekeeper and keep the speaker notice when there are 30 seconds remaining to allow the speaker time to complete or summarize their thoughts. Public comment during a business meeting is a time for the board to listen to comments from the public. But this is not a time for two-way discussion between the board and the public. Please understand the board will not ask nor answer questions. If you have questions or wish to have a response to any item, please submit your comments in writing and the superintendent will follow up with a response. Also, we want to remind you, those in attendance, that this meeting is being video live streamed. The video of the meeting will also be archived and available for viewing after the meeting has adjourned. For those of you sharing a public comment, please be mindful that you're being broadcast live and your comment will also be included in the video archive. So all I do is ask that you introduce yourself and the community you're from.
Do you want me to time? Are you timing?
You can, I appreciate the timing.
Okay, I'll time it. So I'll point it once you're getting close.
Or just say 30 seconds.
30
Well, I
seconds.
just had questions, just because I was trying to digest all of that. But obviously you can't do it. So I'm Debbie D. I'm from Brentwood Elementary School. I'm just questioning too, like with the balanced calendar. I know a lot of people like the balanced calendar, and right now there's a lottery to get in. Like, is there a way to make that like equitable for all families to do it, not just like dual language, but like had Polish or things like that? So maybe have like a school pairing that has that balanced calendar, because I know a lot of people are going to be upset about the balanced calendar being removed. And then my next question would be, oh my gosh, I'm nervous because I'm right up here and I just had it. Going off of the middle school, again, for the middle school, is there a way to draw boundaries, like not just 3 of them, but like redraw boundaries like aggressively, and then like kind of redo programming as another choice for the board to kind of look at it? And then again, I am always opposed of closing schools down, readjusting, but I don't mind building schools. And I like smaller class sizes, coming from CPS with 45 students in a classroom for 4 years straight. So I am not like, I'm opposed to smaller class sizes and making sure that interventionists and proper social work, especially now in today's things, we need a lot more social workers and that. So those are just things like, how can we address those in the aggressive boundary changes? Because maybe not just the 3, but moving more to try to make it more equitable, and the numbers shifting a little bit more. Because I know the first slide, when you did it, only 3 of them, and then 3 schools went to green as opposed to 1, which is great. But are there more boundaries that we can do to make it more green across the board? That way, with programs maybe possibly changing. So again, making sure that it's more equitable. And I know it's more equitable to make everybody change, but is there a way to do it possibly, because change is always hard for everybody, and especially with the last few years of COVID and bad decisions and program shifting around the board. That's just gonna make things harder and more challenging for everyone. So is there a way to ease into it, like so that transition is smoother for everyone?
30 seconds.
Oh, good, I just got in time. That's it.
So I think there was a lot of questions for you, Dr. Bridgenhand. You have them all?
So if I could, yes, I wrote down everything, and we've been in email communication. So please always feel free to email me. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage. I think these were really great questions and almost suggestions for us to look at as a task force. So not questions that I'm going to email you and answer back, but when we consider these, when we bring the task force together, I think these are absolutely things that we want to put on the table and consider as part of building our options. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Is there anyone else who's come to speak before the board? Okay, with that, we have some action items. Yeah, you got to take roll call and stuff. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Cropper. Have a good night.
Night.
Okay, so action item 6.0, 2022-23 budget, tentative to final, board memorandum, and final budget presentation. This would be Mr. O'Connor.
Dr. Bresnahan and Board of Education, hello. I'd like to go over our final budget recommendations, and then that would be up for us to approve of today. But then after the public hearing, we would actually approve of the actual budget in September. So I would like to go over some of the changes, if that's okay. Yes, please. Final budget presentation. I should have had this memorized by now. So just again, slide 2 is again the budget adoption process. And there's no changes from what we've talked about before. We've reviewed this budget over time. This is something that we've worked with internally for the last, I would even say 14 months, only because we've been trying to anticipate a lot of changes that have occurred over time. We've looked at the inflation, and you're going to see that in our budget. That's going to be another problem. But at the same time, the district has adequate resources to make sure that we continue on our way to do the best for our children. The highlights that were utilized, the strategic plan was the first piece, making sure that we are supporting the district's mission, vision, and values, because that is what we live by. Also, the potential facility maintenance and upgrades. We do have our 10-year facilities plan. Looking at our spacing and flexible areas, which was actually discussed a little bit here with Mr. Cropper, making sure that our spaces are adequate and ready to be utilized in different ways. A lot of curricular updates have occurred under the guidance of our curriculum and the special needs departments. And then we have our resource allocation plan that was approved several months ago. So I bring this slide to the board one more time to see the fund balance policy that the district has passed, which is that the district shall maintain an aggregate, so a total no less than 50 to 60% of what you're going to be spending in the ed fund, operations and maintenance, transportation, and working cash. So best practice, honestly, from IASBO, so Illinois Association of School Business Officials, is 25%. The district has adopted a 50 to 60% range. So when you look at that, we're actually at 91%. And that's just another reminder of the resources that the district does have. Of course, we have a lot of commercial and industrial that are outliers in our area compared to other communities. We have the lowest tax base in the area. So this is just an example of how well we're doing.
So
And then if I,
I was just going to say that 25 to 30% guidance is maybe an issue for some districts this year who are lower.
Oftentimes.
because of tax delays, right? So-
Not just that.
Okay.
The 25% delay. There are some districts that don't receive a lot of tax dollars in general. They're held at the whim of the state.
Okay.
I was in a district two districts ago that was very. We were paycheck to paycheck.
Right. So us going above and beyond that as a policy is helpful in strange years, right?
Correct. And nowadays there are a lot of districts that are above and beyond that 25%, but it's because of the COVID dollars that they've received. However, they had to spend that money. So we'll see their fund balances go down. Ours won't have that issue, but 91% is it's good for if there are changes that are needed to be done, if there's anything for our students and supporting our plan. And actually, it's funny because based on the questions being asked, here's the reason why. If you look at the commercial and industrial versus the residential, we are in an inverse relationship with the rest of Cook County when it comes to receiving tax dollars. Most of Cook County depends heavily on your local tax base, which are your homeowners. Whereas in this area here, especially with the tech parks that we have, it's actually more of a commercial industrial situation within our communities, which helps us significantly. And that's why we still continue to look at whoever, in terms of any sort of industrial commercial, what they're looking to fight in terms of the taxes so that we can hold on to those dollars instead of having the taxpayer being stuck with the bill. So here are the changes that we've seen. There's going to be an additional anticipated tax revenue of approximately $200,000. And granted, Dr. Sager, you made the comment about tax delays happening 6 months in Cook County. We've actually have talked independently with PMA, as well as Elizabeth Hennessy is one of our like a contractor of sorts for us, and they they are looking for any sort of way to sell tax anticipation warrants, do whatever they can. I promised them, I said, I guarantee you're not going to find $1 from us. And they said, you're right. You guys are in healthy shape where you're going to be able to handle that 6 months without a problem. And so I think we're going to be in good hands there.
Would anything we discuss today impact this budget, or would any changes to, school pairings, any of those costs and expenses impact next year's budget?
I'm for the one that we're going to adopt in September. I don't anticipate that. There was a lot of the planning that we've done at the Finance and Facilities Committee, as well as what my cash flow is, that we've taken the dollars that may be happening in this regard as we're discussing, and we've been putting it into the 60 fund. The 60 fund it's the capital projects. And in years past, the district hasn't really built it up as much as we're doing now. So when there were examples of the roofing or the HVAC units, whatnot, things that had to be changed, the district had to take out a loan. Well, with the 60 funds we have now, that's not going to happen. I'm not saying that we would have afforded the entire amount that we took forward on, but it at least mitigates a lot of what we think. Again, that's why the 91% just in operating alone is so huge, because that's only four funds there. So this budget, it should not. Now the end, I should actually walk back a little bit. At the end of the fiscal year, possibly, but it's nothing where it's going to destroy this. It's a good thing.
Yeah. I think for clarification purposes, the key thing is school districts are on a cash basis policy. So everything that we pay before June 30th would be in this fiscal year. So like if whatever we decide to do with, the demographics, with equity study is what we're looking at. Any of those bills of, let's say, construction costs and stuff like that, most likely won't come until after June 30th. So they'd be included in the 23-24 budget. So when there's a slide later on that talks about the 22-23 or the 23 budget and the fiscal the
capital projects, most of that was the stuff we spent this summer.
Yes. The buildings and curriculum, we have all prepared as if it's status quo, as if there may be changes. It's not going to be too much in terms of that because let's face it, we have a great staff. We've updated our buildings in general, and we're just going to keep moving. Other changes, now the rest of our expenditures. Workbooks are one in particular to make sure that students do have these materials. Operations and maintenance funding, we're looking right now at, again, the maintenance vehicles, making sure they're on the books. Any sort of identified projects that are pertaining to building upkeep. So for example, there are some unforeseens. Friendships Gym would be one of those examples, right? So we have that money aside so that if something were to happen, I can go to Dr. Bresnahan and say, hey, we have a problem, but I already have a solution. Because no one wants to be surprised. I'll give you a little surprise, but we're going to make it work. So that's kind of the big thing we're doing that with the building upkeep piece. Operation and maintenance, not O&M, but the other thing that we've started looking into, and that'll be on the next slide. Actually, it's not. I forgot about this. This was just recent. It was transportation. No, I'm sorry. Just go. You're good. Is transportation. We're looking at grants for electric buses. And we think that that could do a lot of good for us. Right now, we've just turned in a bunch of information that they can give us a good estimate on to see where we're at with it, if we even qualify. But it's an example of us trying to find different ways to think ahead and to make sure that we are we're minimizing costs on the line. Capital projects here. The construction billing is being updated since June. So there's that cutoff date, as Mr. Reed has mentioned. We have to make sure that we book those expenditures in the right fiscal year. And then the last piece there is the educational life skills program that's being at Holmes this coming year. So we made sure that the equipment, student materials or items are there, and it's going to be ready to roll. We go back to the bond payments remaining. Just in addition, I want you to remember that we are down to one bond. So that's a very good feeling for anybody in any district right now, to be honest with you. So the remainder of our bond payments, if you'll see there, from September 1st all the way down to, yep, there we go, March of 2028. At that time, the district will not have any bonds. I like this slide because it shows, after we've discussed bond payments and now we only have one to go, that these are still the capital projects that we have on our agenda that we are finalizing without having another bond. Mm-hmm. This is what we're doing on our own. Mm-hmm. This is that fiscal responsibility that the board and the community ask our administration to do, and we do it. Mm-hmm. So we talk about air handling units. So like a lot of it's environmental, so that students can actually have a great learning environment where they can, even like the, again, 8 air handling units we talked about. It's not just for COVID. So when you talk about kids having the flu or the sicknesses, these types of items catch that. That's why we use the MERV filtration that we went after. We're hoping that it keeps kids in school because they're not going to be as sick and they're going to be taken care of. LED lighting. Lighting is very important in terms of learning environments. Seal coating, you want to make sure that those parking lots are smooth. The parking lot mill and overlay. I think that you guys will be very, very pleased with what's going on in Clearmont. So please check that out. Again, the water booster pumps, just so that we don't have any more flooding like what happened at Holmes. That's also tying in with the sanitary lines. Fire panel replacements, PA systems for safety, the retention pond that was formerly the parking lot, and then finalizing the Friendship Gym. The other piece in mind with capital projects that hasn't really, it's in our thoughts and ideas, but with our safety planning that we've been doing, and the board will hear more of that as time comes on, that'll be in here as well. But the funding is there.
But I want you to point out, is this the stuff that was done this past summer? it was approximately about $8 million total, approximately $8 million worth of work.
Yeah, I'd have to look to make sure. I mean,
Around there.
some
5 million for the air handling, 2 million for the lighting.
right. Air handling was 6 maybe. It was a lot of money that was funded properly, and we didn't need it to go out for a bond. That's the success there.
The parking lot mill and overlay at Claremont, explain what that means, because it looks to me like the whole front section's being done.
Yeah, they're taking care of all of it because of all the bumps and I guess how beat up it was before. So they're taking care of that. And then Mr. Tiarina decided to figure out and work with the vendor to make sure that the sidewalks are being taken care of as well, so that it's just a nice, beautiful entrance there. And I'll give an update on the Friday update as to when these are approximately going to be done. I know there was a project completion status of tomorrow, but that doesn't always happen, but it'll be done well before school
It's
starts.
that whole front section.
Or no, we had to tear up the parking lot because they had put a sanitary line in. The sanitary line was damaged, so we had to dig down and put a new sanitary line. So once we dug down, I had to dig up part of the parking lot. The decision was made to just fix it all at once instead of having a patch in and have to fix that a couple years later.
Yeah, it was like, 2 birds with 1 stone type of thing. And it's been incredible seeing with the sanitary lines. I'm just grateful that you guys haven't seen the videos of some of the stuff that they've pulled out and they've taken care of with those tiles. So we are as new as it gets right now with a lot of the buildings. So as a result of the changes, the operating funds, again, as high as a difference as the ed fund can be, the transportation fund is the one that I don't want to say concerns me, because again, going back to this for people who are at home and for any people who are here today to listen, we didn't drive the buses a lot last year, right? We didn't have to pay the vendors so much. So what happened was you normally get your reimbursement the next year for all of the rides and everything you get taken care of, whatever. Then you give your hey, this is how much we need back in return. And then they'll reimburse you for that. And typically it's pretty set and standard. Well, the problem with COVID last year and the year before that was that it wouldn't always happen. So as a result, we're not anticipating anywhere near what we normally would get for that reimbursement. However, our transportation fund, like it's almost like your bank account that you have on the side, is well over that $8.2 million. So we're in great shape. The ed fund, there's another example there. That's a $2.1 million in the black. So when you look at all of this for the operating funds, this is what the state goes for. We are at a surplus of $192,006. Now, granted, again, it sounds small. However, there is contingency money built in for any sort of issues or situations that we do have. Inflation, for example, transportation, that was 9.75% for special ed, 10% of an increase for reg ed, and that was the going rate. Inflation that we've seen at home, it hits schools too. The gasoline piece, the food prices are going up. A lot of contractors have gone up about 7 to 8% in their CPI. And then even sort of like materials. So that's why you're seeing a lot of this eaten up. This is a very conservative, really kind of like a worst case scenario built in budget so that we can pay our bills, make sure everything's taken care of, and everyone has some peace of mind.
And just so I get it, so 192,000 surplus. Anything that the administration seeks to procure during the year is already budgeted for. So Ben, I'll put you up example only. Ben wants to buy equipment that he already has a budget for that. It's not coming out of 192.6.
Correct. And then the fund balance right now that we have on, when we talked about the fund balance, 91%, in operations alone, it's over $100 million. So and we are investing it. We're being efficient with it. So yeah, we're doing what we can to make sure that taxpayer dollars are taken care of.
What would be an unexpected worst case scenario where we had to draw from that? Something catastrophic, something.
There's a lot of things we can think of here. The Grove Gym, right? Because we
like insurance didn't cover it. We have to. Yeah.
No. Like catastrophic is if that happened.
Oh, if it happens.
Or right, Mr. Reed's right.
Mhm.
But if the friendship gym had,
Yeah.
had something again, like
Yeah.
it could be anything.
Mhm.
I saw Dr. Breslin like I don't know. So, but it,
He's thinking about the tornado warning we've had meetings.
Yeah.
but I mean, bottom line is we're in good hands with a lot of that.
We are insured on a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, our insurance rate's a lot better right now with the property casualty.
And just to comment on the transportation being as much of a problem as it is, when we're making all of these changes, et cetera, to our district transportation, we got to really think about because it's very expensive.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay.
Any questions, comments? Okay, item 6.01B, the recommendation for changes to the tentative budget. Do we have a motion? I can make the motion. Be it resolved on the first day of August 20.
Seconded by, wait, we seconded.
Let him make it first.
I gotta make it first and
A lot
then
of pressure here, guys.
second. We'll train you.
Patty's watching right now.
Okay, be it resolved on the first day of August 2022, the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 59 approved the following changes to the 2022-23 budget for purpose of adoption. Said changes to be attached to these minutes as part of the record of deliberation over the same. There was a public display on adoption and as presented below.
Second.
No.
Okay, now there are questions, comments. Roll call.
All right. Espino,
Aye.
Lang is absent. Mancia, aye. Patty is absent. Reed,
Aye.
Sager,
Aye.
Schumacher.
Hi.
The ayes have it.
Okay.
And just for clarity, because I feel like this needs to be addressed, when you see like the budget on public display being the total being $130 million versus the expense, that's for all our funds. So that's why you'll see sometimes when our operating funds are, we balance those really well. And then we put money in that 60 fund. That's a non-operating fund. It's like a savings account, right? That's what we have. So I just wanted to clarify.
138 mil is what?
So the $130 million is for all of our funds for the entire year.
Yep, for the whole year.
Yeah. And that includes like the working cash, Mardell, that we've had over time too and whatnot. That is like 12 million sitting in there right now.
To me, working cash is one of the most important things because I don't think we should use it unless it's emergency because that was what it was created for.
All right.
Item 7.0, public hearing for the 2022-2023 budget. We don't need a motion on this, do we?
Mhm.
It's built within there.
It's-
To open and to close are in there.
Oh, there it is. I just gotta scroll down. All right, could someone make a motion? Okay, I'll make the motion. Well, wait till a second. Okay. Motion made by Randy Reed, seconded by
I'll second.
Ms. Espinoza.
No.
Espino, oh my gosh. That the Community College School District 59 Board of Education meeting be open on this date, August 1st, 2022, for a public hearing on the proposed budget for the 2022-23 year, and that the secretary shall record the time as 8:24. Roll call, please.
Okay, let's see. Lang absent. Mancia, aye. Petrielli absent. Randy,
Aye.
Sager,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
and Espino.
Aye.
And the ayes have it.
And the motion passes. Is there anyone that's come to speak to the board? Okay. All right, can I have a motion to close the discussion on the, hold on, why is it not working?
I move that we close the discussion
On
on
the
the
public hearing.
proper presentation and discussion.
No, it's for the budget, the budget.
Oh, the budget, I'm
Budget.
sorry. I moved that we close the discussion on the new budget.
And do we have a second?
Second.
Can you read the resolution there, Mardell?
I got it right here for you.
Motion on the 2022-23 proposed budget is be closed, and the secretary shall record the hearing,
Time is 8:25.
the time 8:25.
25. Okay.
I thought we already read that.
That was to open
let's
it.
open it.
Now this is the votes.
Oh.
All right.
okay.
Roll call. Any questions?
Roll call.
All right. Mancia, I will start. Aye. Patty is absent. Randy,
Aye.
Sager,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.
Espino.
Aye.
All right. The ayes have it.
With that, the meeting is adjourned. Have a great hour. That motion passes, that's right, the motion passes? Oh, yeah.
We haven't done that. That's what I was trying to do before.
All right. I make a motion.
I will do that. Be resolved that on the first day of August 20, I can't speak. On the first day of August 2022, the Community Consolidated School District 59 Board of Education meeting is adjourned.
I second it.
Okay, roll call.
Patty, absent. Reed.
Aye.
Patty's absent. Reed. Aye. Sager.
Aye.
Schumacher.
Aye.
Espino.
Aye.
Lang is absent. Mancia. Aye. The ayes have it.